2. Mrs. Camphouse, please call the roll.
Mr. Atwood.
Present.
Mrs. Cole.
Present.
Ms. Ballard.
Present.
Mrs. Rarica.
Present.
Mr. Taylor.
Present.
I would like to ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3 on our agenda is the adoption of tonight's agenda. I'd like to make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda as written.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I believe we were moving Mr. Peter up in,
We're going to move him first.
okay.
Yep, so Mr. John Peter is going to present an update to us. So he'll be the first discussion item. Mrs. Camphouse, please call the roll.
Mr. Atwood.
Yes.
Mrs. Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Ballard.
Yes.
Mrs. Rarica.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
With the agenda adopted for tonight, item 4 is discussion items, and first on the agenda is Mr. Peter, who's giving us an update.
Thank you, Mr. President. After the discussions we had last month with the custodial cleaning for the evenings, I wanted to dig into a little bit more and find out where exactly we have some problems. So I started sending out some surveys starting the day after the regular board meeting last Friday on the 22nd. I didn't want to do the whole district as a whole because I'll be quite honest, I was a little worried I was going to get bombarded with too many comments. So I sent out some surveys to both Sharpsburg buildings and the Williams Avenue group on Friday the 22nd. I received 3 responses back from Sharpsburg group and 3 from the Williams Avenue group. On the 27th, I sent out some surveys to the Norwood View group and the middle school. I got 7 responses from Norwood View and 4 responses from the middle school. Last Friday, I sent out a survey to the high school, and I got 31 responses back.
Holy moly.
I want to clarify just a little bit. This may not be so much of a survey. It was just kind of a blanket question. How do you feel the cleaning is going? So I kind of left it. It was a little bit open-ended. I gave them some freedom to just answer any way they wanted. 2 of the responses I got back were highly complimentary, and they said they're doing a great job. They're very responsive in anything we ask them to do. In one case, I did find that one of these complimentary responses was a direct contrary answer to one of the staff members who said they're not doing a very good job at all. So I found that very interesting, and I want to dig into that a little bit further as time goes on and try to figure out why is there such a disconnect between 2 parts of the building. But as you mentioned, as you saw as I was reading out the responses there from by the school, you see that the vast majority of the criticisms were coming from the high school. And I think that goes along with what was mentioned last month about the high school really hasn't had a chance over the past 2 summers, and including this upcoming summer, to get a good cleaning because of the construction that's been going on. The first 2 years we've had, the construction company basically was trying to get the building released to the staff to set up their classrooms the very week before school started. So that really didn't give them a very good chance to get the building clean. Of the high school responses, about 70% of them were from the top floor. So I think that, again, gives us a very good location to look at and try to address what's going on in that particular area. About half of those responses for the high school said that the floors were not being swept, and the majority of those also high school responses were saying that they're not being mopped. So again, I think that gives us a very good place to start looking on where we can improve. Going forward, I did have a conversation with the project manager for the construction company, and I explained to her we cannot have what happened the last 2 summers. They have to have an opportunity to get in there and get these hallways stripped and waxed, classrooms cleaned. They've got to have a chance to get it done right. And she fully agreed, and she said time or space will be made for them to do that. So I was very appreciative of that from her. Another thing I would like to do as time goes forward, I would like to continue to send out these surveys or questionnaires, or however we want to refer to them, as the year goes on in the school year next year. I would like to stay on top of it, make sure they know that we're not just going to let it go. We've got to continue to stay on top of it and get answers back on how they feel the service is being provided. Another thing we did was I met with the building maintenance guys, and I said, I want answers from you guys as well, and I want feedback from you. If you're the first one in the building in the morning and you're walking the hallways and you see something was missed, let's make a log and turn in that log every week or every other week or something, so that we have another set of eyes just keeping an eye on things. In closing, though, I would like to say that of the first couple of schools that we sent out this survey to, I started asking the staff members that had sent in complaints and said, has your room improved since you sent that your response in? And I am getting some very good feedback saying, yes, it has been better. So I think improvements can be made, they will be made, and we just got to stay on top of it. And that's on me. I will stay on top of it.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Peter for the feedback and the update for this. I also want to thank you for taking ownership of this. And so I ownership and pride in how our school looks is a big deal, and I appreciate that, and I thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You know, we were all in here for the Fine Arts Fair weekend before last, and I made a point to notice, is that? But I went into a bathroom and it was sparkling, just so you know. It was the one by the gym. Absolutely sparkling.
Good. That's the way it should be.
And the team
But I
was hard
didn't
at
go
work
upstairs to a
today.
bathroom, so I don't know. And I did a little upstairs because I came across the bridge, but I didn't see much.
When I came in tonight, the team was downstairs working really hard on that lower floor of the middle school. All the doors were open, a lot of cleaning equipment out. Everything was being diligently worked on today.
Good.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Peter? No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next item on our agenda is another discussion topic, and this is the science resources adoption. And I'll turn the floor over to Mrs. Chesson, Mrs. Rutgers, and Mrs. Dykes.
Thank you, Mr. President and board members. We are thrilled to be here tonight, all three of us. And we are happy to talk to you about the work that this great group of colleagues has done over the year to be here tonight to share our science recommendations. So we're going to start with what our priorities were. As we got together last April, actually, we started seeking out some people that wanted to be part of the process. And when the group got together, they said they wanted some key things to happen when we talked about science. And our question we asked is, what does high quality science look like? And among our responses that we came up with together, we knew that we wanted it to be engaging and fun and collaborative. We wanted to have some inquiry-based, real world problem-solving opportunities where students could critique. And we wanted throughout this process to be able to review and to have a methodology for reviewing our work. Whoops, Daisy. The timeline, I said we began in April. We met as a K-12 team to analyze the depth of knowledge and the cognitive demands that we were currently using among all of our science standards. And as a group, we discussed things that students needed to understand to be successful in science before each grade. And I will say it was very healthy to have this vertical team together, because we learned a lot from our high school colleagues about what students brought to the table as they entered 9th grade and how we could support that work in K-8. And so there was a really healthy conversation. So each group of teachers with all their varied experiences brought something to the table so that we could learn from one another. We also looked at those frames, that cognitive demand and that depth of knowledge, to choose the resources that we thought would continue to either increase our levels of achievement or enhance areas that needed increased cognitive demands. And in total, we looked at 7 different programs, and we decided in the end to pilot about 3 overall in various grades at the K-8 level. And at the high school, it's a little different ball game, so we had to research what does it look like for physical science, and what are our opportunities out there. So each high school separate course looked at some options, piloted a little bit, researched a lot, and made selections accordingly. So we're going to start with, we chunked our work, so we're going to start with our K-2 group of teachers. And what we really wanted to do is to build a program K-12, but we recognize that each level of our student learners have different needs. And our K-2 has a certain set of needs that we wanted to honor and celebrate in this work. And Kelly's going to share a little bit about our K-2 adoption that we came up with. You want me to click for you, or would you?
Oh, no, I'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So as Mrs. Justin said, we piloted another program that was just a little bare bones, and so I talked to her and I said, don't be mad, but I would like to try the McGraw-Hill Inspire Science. And so we tried that next. I would definitely say it meets the needs of our K-2 students a lot more. Mostly because, we are really focused on math and reading, and this is great because the kids are already familiar with the McGraw-Hill site that we use for reading. So that's a plus for them. They're already familiar with it. So this is the model of Inspire Science. It starts with the 5 E's, which is kind of what we're seeing all across science right now, is this 5E model. So we look for engaging the students at the beginning. There's this big question phenomenon that they have the students look at, and this is like their puzzle that they're trying to put together from the very beginning. Then they're exploring. We're going to show you some hands-on kits that come with the program. Then they are explaining what they're learning, and this is extending through literacy as well. So it gets some great literacy content in there for them, and they are elaborating. So they are sharing their research with others and reevaluating themselves, revisiting the claims and thoughts that they had from the beginning. And then they're evaluating. So then at the very beginning with Engage, that they're making those I will statements, what they're going to be learning, so setting that goal. And then at the very end, when they're evaluating, they're doing the I did statement. So they're sharing what they did, what they learned from this process. This is the instructional model as well, just kind of shows how they go around these 5 E's. And within, there are 4 modules, and then 2 of them are 5 modules, 2 of them are broken up a little bit. And there's 7 STEM projects. So Katie and I have already discussed, ways that we can also extend this into STEM as well, with some projects that maybe I'm not able to do as much in the classroom, just to elaborate on it even more, getting them some more hands-on activities with science. These are just some sample units. We did Earth's landforms, the unit that I did with the kids, and they loved it. I have this. This is the student workbook that they get to write in. Very engaging. The kids loved the pictures. I love that it's nice and slim. It's nothing like super bulky, and then they can take this whole thing home with them and share with their parents. Because as a parent, I like to see what my kids are doing in school. So I love this portion. So here are some of those collaboration kits. And then online, there's interactive simulations that they get to mess around with, play with, experiment, and see what works best. And they can, as I was saying before, like revisit those ideas and change things up to make it work. Something else that I wanted to mention online that they'll have access to is Inspire News, Impact News. So they get to see relevant articles, which is great, that go along with what we're learning about. Leveled readers, the same ones that we use for our reading program. So that goes to their level, to their needs for reading, which is great. And then there's also an option for, forget what the name of it is, but it's like an article book that they can physically have it in school and look at and read. And then this is just some highlights. of the program. Just shows you a little bit. We don't know if the volume's going to work. Cody didn't know for sure if the volume would work or not. So it doesn't look like it.
I kind of hear it. It's like just music.
Yeah.
It's just background music.
Yes.
It played brilliantly before we all got in here for some reason. Of course.
Does anybody want to see this one? I know you're looking at the older grade levels. This is different.
Is that the K through 2?
Yes, this is the
four-
K2.
This is grade 4,
Mhm.
which I have here.
So it's very engaging, photos and everything for them to explore.
I've noticed, and some of the feedback that we've gotten in the past from parents asking about curriculum updates, specifically, gender representation, diversity representation. This has kids with disabilities featured, kids of different ethnicities featured, women scientists featured. So I think that that's a really important thing that you guys have addressed in this material choice. So thank you for listening to that feedback from our parents.
I noticed one in one of mine too, and I was like, oh, good job.
Well, it's nice to get updated resources, isn't it?
Always wonderful. And this is way lighter than any science book I ever had.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
what I appreciated about
I'm
it.
like, this is so much cooler than the stuff I had. I think we just had a textbook. That was it. And you just sat there and you had to read and answer questions, and then we got to walk to the water sewage plant. And then we raced turtles. I don't know. It was fine, but this is way better.
And that's what I'm really looking forward to. And Mrs. Cheslin is already talking about dates to get us together to start mapping out our curriculum for next year and really thinking about when can we fit those STEM projects and they're going to take more time. Because as a teacher, you need to know ahead of time about those bigger projects. So
There's a lot more open-ended stuff in here too, especially for little ones. They're way more creative than we give them credit for sometimes. So to give them the opportunity to not just check a box and really see where their mind's at,
and
see where
this
their
is second
understanding
grade,
is.
just so.
Yeah, it used to be like, is it this or this? Like it's one of them. You're wrong or you're right. And this gives them a way to say, okay, how can I think about that? How can I incorporate it? That's really cool.
So we'll move on. You'll hear that notion of phenomenon keep carrying on as we move to the 3 to 8 group. And Katie's gonna kind of take over and do grades 3 to 8, which we have a different selection for that chunk of grade levels. Sure, that's fine.
So I'm going to talk about Amplify for grades 3 through 8. I'm more knowledgeable on the 3 through 5 spectrum just because I'm in the elementary buildings, but we looked at 3 different programs starting out and we decided to pilot 2 of them. And within the first 2 weeks of the pilot for the other series, which was very teacher friendly, you could walk in and it was like the standard science textbook, but the students could write in it. The teachers immediately said, like, this would never work. There's not enough rigor. It's not hard enough. It's really easy for me to do. I can easily like walk in and say, we're doing pages 5 through 10 today. But there was only a paragraph about each topic and it just wasn't rigorous enough. I started out with the Amplify pilot. There's a lot of resources on your desk. Amplify is unlike any science program I've ever seen, where instead of students walking in and learning, the teacher's saying, like, our standard this week is I can understand and explain how earthquakes work, or I can understand and explain the process of how light travels. Students are always started with a phenomena-based question. I think you can go to the next one.
Okay.
And they're always given the role of a scientist. So at your table, some of the cards kind of show, looks like a piece of cardstock, that like they would take on the role of being a seismologist, a volcanologist, or a meteorologist, in 3 separate groups, and they're figuring out how earthquake patterns cause tsunamis. And then in that, they're learning all the science about earthquakes, all the science about volcanoes, all the science about tsunamis, but instead it's using all of these smaller books. Each group, each unit has 6 books. There's 4 units per grade level for 3 through 5. Or, like, why are the jaguars and sloths disappearing in the Costa Rican rainforest? You're being an ecologist. Or as a food chemist, can you figure out the molecular compositions of ingredients and energy bars to be tailored for metabolic rates for, like, rescue workers? So instead of just, I'm going to kind of spit the information at you and I expect you to remember it, the students are working and collaborating in groups to try to figure out these real world problems, and then in the same instance learning the standards that we want them to learn. So,
I love all those really big words you said too, because it's good to give the little kids, just
so-
give them the big words.
If you were gonna think
They love
about,
it.
like, if you're interested in animals anyways, I really like that it teaches students about a variety of jobs that they would never hear about as scientists and engineers. Like, just on this slide alone, like, there's a rocket engineer, there's the meteorologist and the weather people, there's an archaeologist, ecologist, food chemist, a light engineer. So they're learning about a lot of different areas of science that I don't think students always know that there's jobs out there for that. They think like, oh, I'm going to be a scientist, but there's thousands of different kinds. Or I'm going to be an engineer, there's thousands of different types of engineering you can do. So these are some sample units. I tried to hit a couple different grade levels. In third grade, one of their big units is force and motion. So the students are given the anchor phenomenon of the town of Faraday is getting a train that floats above its tracks. So they have to be mechanical engineers to figure out how a floating train would work in order to explain to the citizens of Faraday why, like, basically they should pay taxes to get this floating train and how it's going to benefit them. In fourth grade, energy conversions is a big one, electricity. And so the town of Ergstown, which is a native town, is experiencing frequent blackouts. So students have to take on the role of system engineers for the city and look at all the components of things that could be affecting, like, why they keep having these frequent blackouts. 8 is light waves. So the rate of skin cancer is higher in Australia than in other parts of the world. Most students will automatically, by 8th grade, come to the conclusion that it's because they're really close to the equator. But they have to take on the role of spectroscopists and figure out how the light waves are actually interacting with the matter and causing those higher skin cancer rates in UV waves.
I'm 47 and I just heard what a spectroscopist is for
Which
the
is
first
a really
time
cool
ever.
thing. And just coming in to a new unit and saying to students, like, you're going to be a food chemist for the next 4 weeks. And one of the things it does do with the jobs and, like, the different units, it doesn't do it with all of them, but at least with 2 for each grade level, is it actually connects you. So, like, I did the Costa Rican rainforest, why are the jaguars and sloths disappearing? And by the end, students have to write a summary of why they were disappearing, and you send them to the Costa Rican, like, rainforest conservation group, and then they respond back, like, whether or not the answer was correct.
Like real people do that?
Decomposers, yeah.
It's not just like plugging into the computer.
No,
like-
no, somebody actually responds back, but it's only 2 of the 4 units that we have in 3 through 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 have, I think they have 6 units per year. Their units are a little shorter.
I have a rocket science friend if you want her to write back to you.
It doesn't have a standard textbook. Students have a research journal for each of the 4 units. I have some of those spread out. The research journal comes in English or Spanish. And then it has a digital learning platform that is pairs well with Google. Everything's on Google Slides. It's really nice as a teacher that it'll let you go in and edit it if you want to make changes to the Google Slides, or you can just kind of use what they have, and it walks you through lesson by lesson. It tells you the amount of time it should take. It also even tells you, like, if, say they're saying you have 90 minutes to teach a 5th grade science bill and you don't, it'll say this is how you should chunk it. Like, this is 15 minutes, this is 30 minutes. Or even, like, what you could pull out if it's like the week before Christmas and you have only 3 days instead of 5. Like, what isn't as key or as core of learning. So that's a nice thing, is from the teacher perspective. So all of the materials come in nice crates for each unit. It has everything you could need. When I did the Costa Rican rainforest, they, made terrariums, and it came with all the plastic containers. It came with the dirt. It came with the squirt bottles. It comes with, like, the linking cubes and the yarn to make food webs. So the kits are very thorough. It also has really great digital simulations, and the digital simulations match what is on the 5th grade and 8th grade air testing very well, which is a nice thing as a teacher to make sure students are seeing that frequently. So one of the unique things about Amplify compared to any of the other science pilots we looked at was it is based in reading, and we all know students need to be doing as much reading as possible. So it provides a science word wall, chapter questions, unit questions, and then 6 of these books for each unit, and you get 18 of each of them. And then students use these books to like do their discovery, to come up with their answers to those phenomenon-based questions. Some of the books I left out on the table have like evidence cards in them that the students would use, like kind of guide them through the book as they're working in groups. These are just a couple samples of the books. The program was created around the idea that it's teaching kids to use reading and that critical thinking piece in a different format than just using it in language arts, to kind of see that connection between the two. This is really cool. I haven't seen this with any program. Every single lesson, experiment, simulation is explained for you and taught, and you can pull it off and put it on your Google Classroom. So if the teacher's absent and has a substitute, she can pull the video up of a teacher doing, the patterns of Earth Sky investigation, lesson 2.1, and the teacher will teach it all through the screen. Or if you have a first-year teacher who doesn't remember all of their science and they've kind of gotten thrown into that position, they can watch it and it'll show them what it is and show them like how to set up the experiment. Like it should look exactly like this, or these are the things you would talk about. It's just a really useful tool. They did it when COVID first started, where they paid basically teachers already using the program to just teach the whole thing and have it all available. So that's Amplify. Does anybody have any questions about Amplify? Good. All right.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the high school, and as I mentioned before, they're a little bit different in nature. So those covers represent the things we're bringing for your consideration for adoption. Biology and the AP Biology, you'll see physics and the AP Physics, environmental science, a little anatomy and physiology, and the physical science books. You might notice we're missing chemistry, and I think partially due to the pandemic, things weren't quite as readily available, so we're not ready to commit to a new chemistry. We think there's a few more coming on the horizon, maybe even this summer or even next school year. So we're comfortable with what we currently have, and we want to always consider whatever's out there to be the most up-to-date that we can get at that time period. So we'll be bringing some more selections for your attention and consideration probably next school year for the following year as we continue our research. This team of high school members, we had 2 committee members that came to all of our meetings, but then they would go back and go to their department. And because they're all specialists embedded within the department, they took control of, I'll take over, I teach AP Physics, let me start reviewing AP Physics. So they all took the lead in their respective courses that they're a part of. And we're grateful to them. And as I said before, we were grateful for the whole span, K-2 teachers talking to 3-8, talking to 9-12, and that vertical alignment was key in this. And the team really worked together and came up with what they wanted to celebrate in our science program. And I think collectively, they're individually and collectively, we're proud of it. This represents our group of powerful teachers, and I do want to name them out loud. And I'm going to do it by grade level, so in case you want to know by grade level, we had in kindergarten Kathy O'Neill and Sarah Cosgrove. We had 2nd grade teachers Christina Shore and Kelly Reckers. We had 3rd grade teachers Amy Wiles and Melissa O'Connor. We had 5th grade teachers Natalie Pining, Paige Gerald, Katie Dykes, Marshall Dykes. 6th grade Melissa Burns. In 7th grade we had Kelly Duncan and Paul Schember. In 8th grade we had Lauren Kang, and Teresa Lingardo and Leslie Held were our 9-12, and then Therese Booth also joined our team. We also worked with some Hamilton County consultants in the area of science because they have a nice sense of what's going on regionally, statewide, and even in the nation. So we celebrated their expertise as well to help us get started and kick off. So again, this was a powerful group beginning their work last April, and so we're really happy to share what we've come up with now and to seek your approval as we move forward to, in essence, transform science for this entire community. And hopefully out of this, we will create some new opportunities for our students that they might not have thought of before this time. And I'm so appreciative of both Katie Dykes and Kelly Reckers for joining us here tonight to be able to answer those specific questions. Any other questions from anyone?
I do. I kind of like the Amplify model and what they're doing here with the materials. Have we had this opportunity to look at other areas like history or English and see if they have other materials that might follow this same model?
They do have other materials, so they would say, thank you for bringing that up. But one step at a time. It's a big deal when we go through this kind of adoption and do it well.
Right.
So they have always approached us for their Amplify reading. They do have an Amplify Social Studies now that was new on the horizon. So they would love for us to come their direction, as would all of those sales reps. So we take it really seriously, and we are critical consumers of everything that comes our way. And just because it's shiny, we don't go to the shiny. Kelly said, like, this isn't gonna work, we need something else. So we pivoted a couple times throughout this process, like, that's not quite good enough, let's have a go with something else, which made it take a little bit longer, but in the end, I think we're really happy with the way it turned out.
I've met with some of these folks at different conferences, and I've worked with some staff who said their teachers would use things like this as supplements in programming that they were already using because they liked it so much. So I'm really excited that you're bringing the whole program and not just leaving it to the teachers to go, you know what, but this is really cool, and picking and choosing, because this is a really neat program. I'm kind of excited for it.
We do think we're stronger when we work together and we commit to a certain approach, and then not everything's going to be perfect, so we'll find the holes, we fill the holes. You heard Kelly say we're going to start our work and ask Katie Dykes and Marshall Dykes, using their STEM expertise, to come in June and say, like, hey, in first grade, in second grade, you might want to consider adding this to it, because we know not everything is perfect, and the teachers are willing to do the work to make it as good as it needs to be for our students and to the best of our ability at this time. So we feel good about our selections, and we feel good about the strength we have to find those places that it's not perfect and make it better. And that's what good teaching is about, good planning is about, which leads to good teaching. So, all right, thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you, ladies.
All right. Are there any other questions? So I don't have any questions, but I do have one comment. So as a degreed chemist and science guy, you know, I have a soft spot for the science curriculum. And what I like the most about what's been chosen here that we're going to be voting on next week to approve is that we're teaching the kids not what to learn, but how to learn. And learning is lifelong. So the sooner that you can instill those good principles and those good habits of how to figure out how to learn, that makes everything else so much easier. And the best place to start that is with science. I mean, because everything's a word problem. Everything's a puzzle, and everything has to be figured out. And, you know, when I was going through school at the early age, it wasn't necessarily like that. Right, it was all a bunch of facts that you were just memorizing, and
Worksheets.
And what's different about it now, and I wish, you know, again, this is evolution. I wish it was more like what we're looking at adopting now, you know, 30 years ago. But you know, I'm glad for it, and I'm happy for it, and you know, I hope the board approves this curriculum next week. So.
My favorite class was always science, and it was usually whenever we got to blow stuff up, or make stuff, and you know that was the most fun thing that you could do as a kid. So,
My favorite was the egg drop thing. You build the thing to protect the egg, and then we're throwing it off the roof of the school.
Chuck it off the roof of the building, and
Yep.
see who survives.
It's a good time. Oh, and the rockets. But, and just so our parents and everybody out there knows, this isn't the first time that they've been teaching, asking those questions and getting the kids to learn in that way, like the way that Brandon is describing. I've witnessed Katie Dykes and Marshall Dykes teaching in the classrooms, and they always do it that way. But I'm glad now that they'll have a system that supports the way that they already teach.
Right.
And other teachers, I've seen them do it. And they're so good.
Right. Any other comments? Yep. We'll move on to the third item in our discussion section, and that is May's 5-year forecast. So I'd like to turn the floor over to our treasurer, Mrs. Campos.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And I'll move out of the way again.
So tonight we were reviewing the 5-year forecast for May. We've seen a lot of changes in the past year and a half. State funding formula has changed, commercial tax valuations have dropped, and our expenditures have decreased. We will talk about these 3 points in depth and how they affect our bottom line. I'm happy to say that this forecast is fiscally more healthy than the November one due to staffing changes. For all of our staff and administrators that are helping us to spend ESSER and bond money wisely to benefit the children of our district, please continue their efforts. The forecast stands alone, detailing just the general fund. This is a summary statement of our new May 5-year forecast. And in this graph, the black bars are revenues and the gray is expenditures. You will see in 2025 where the arrow is pointing, this is the year that we start spending into our carryover. We've pushed off this negative cash flow until the last 2 years of the forecast. In our November forecast, we had 3 years of negative cash flow by not replacing several staff members that retired or resigned. Now during 22, 23, and 24, we are able to add to our general fund cash balance as ESSER funds are saving general fund dollars. But by 2025, our cash balance is expected to decline when we bring those 31 staff members back into the general fund. Forecasted estimates do include all staff coming back into the general fund by fiscal year 2025. This graph talks about our revenue as a total. And on the left side with all the colors, you'll see that state funding has fallen, that's in yellow. And so in 2021, compared to 2026, 26 is smaller for state funding. Real estate taxes, 2021 is smaller, but in 2026 it's larger. So in short, in 2026, real estate taxes revenue has become more dear to us. On the bar graph to the right, except for 2018, you'll see that our past revenues are remarkably stagnant. And then in the last 5 years, when I'm estimating future revenues, they're not much better. But I do have some growth planned in there, and we'll talk about that in the next couple of pages. These graphs talk about just real estate taxes. And in the dark blue, on the left, you'll see in 2021, real estate taxes are about 50% of our total revenues. But by 2026, we expect that to grow to almost 55%. On the right, in the light blue graph, the first 5 years are actual and the last 5 years are estimated. Most of the fluctuations in the past were due to settlements on commercial tax properties, not true growth. Revenues in 2021 were disappointing, as some of our commercial taxpayers had delinquent tax payments, but much was made up in the first settlement of this year. However, in the second settlement of this year, again, commercial tax revenue fell from our estimate due to delinquent payments. Still, with the residential valuation increase, I expect tax revenue to grow steadily while the housing market continues to inflate. I will be watching the housing market closely for signs of a real estate slowdown and will adjust the forecast as needed. This graph talks about state funding, and in the orange is unrestricted, and in the green is restricted. Each bar is a different year, starting out with 20, 21, and then 22. So the third one from the left is our current year. And you'll see our revenues are falling. Additionally, you'll see that our green revenues, that restricted, are growing, while our unrestricted revenues are falling. And restricted revenue is quite a bit more difficult to spend than unrestricted revenue is. So restricted revenue, they tell us what we must spend it on, And they're pretty strict about that. And then they watch how we spend it when we do our reporting at the end of the year. One other thing that I've done in the May forecast that I did have in the November forecast, I had guarantee reductions, and maybe you'll remember me talking about that in the November forecast. So the state has 4 different guarantees built into state revenues, and some of those guarantees are permanent in law, but the majority of them are temporary. And in November's forecast, I had about 3% of our state revenues in guarantees dropping. I've taken those reductions to guarantee payments out because the state on their own is seeing about 8% more in tax revenues than they estimated. So in short, they can afford to continue to pay us and all the other public school districts guarantee funding. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to continue to pay us guarantee funding. And if they change those laws, I will have to change the forecast. It just seemed more practical to take the guarantee cuts out this time. Expenditures, this is just a brief overview of our expenditures. The most important part of this graph is on the left, the colorful graph. In 2021, you'll see salaries and benefits in total are about 72%. And in 2026, you'll see that grows to 80%. 80% of any public schools budget that is given to salaries and benefits is just too high. Salaries and benefits should never be above truly 75%. 80% is just unreasonable. And that doesn't leave you money to take care of your buildings or purchase curriculum or textbooks or anything else that you might need to purchase. On the right in the dark blue, you'll see that our expenditures are changing quite drastically, dropping. Now, of course, that is for our ESSER money, where we're spending our ESSER money, and we'll talk about that in another slide. This slide describes our categorical payroll and to define our 2024 cliff. So in this graph, the red is our classified staff, the green is our certified teaching staff, orange is our administration, and then blue is our supplementals and subs and other more smaller costs that we have in salaries. And so you'll see orange, there's very little changes. In red, there's some changes on the last 3 bars where we bring our classified staff back into the general fund from ESSER. But the great majority of the changes you'll see in the green there. And so in 2022 and 2023, our payroll is the lowest it's been for teachers in several years. And that is because we have several staff members, probably about 18 staff members, being paid out of ESSER funds instead of the general fund. And then in 2025, you'll see that growing. I'm sorry, 2024, these numbers are too small even for me to read. So in 2024, you'll see that growing, where we bring some staff members back into the general fund. And finally, in 2025, ESSER is expired and all of our staff members have to come into the general fund. And those last 2 years of this graph is where we start seeing us spend into our carryover and start deficit spending. This graph defines our purchase services, and I've been in school finance for a very long time, and I've never seen a drop in expenditures like this before. But from 20 to 2021, you'll see that large drop, and that is all due to, or the great majority of it is due to the state funding changes, where now all school choice costs have to be absorbed by the state's funding, not by the school district's budget. So our purchase services have dropped by $1.7 million in 1 year's time, and that's just phenomenal. So without those school choice costs in there, our budget is manageable. So purchase services right now include contracted cleaning costs, contracted transportation, utilities, staff training, those kind of things, much smaller costs. And also special ed contracted costs. And again, just because these numbers are so fantastic, that you just never see a 1.7 million drop in expenditures in any line item. I wanted to talk about it again, so I broke it out by different colors. And you'll see that our expenditures for community schools, which is the gray, open enrollment, which is red, and special education vouchers have all dropped significantly from last year to this year, which is really helping our bottom line. And that's the one point that I want to make with our state funding. Even though our state funding dropped a little bit in revenues, it dropped a lot in expenditures. And so we are better off with the new funding formula than we were with the old funding formula. It's just not quite as evident or easy to read. You have to do some digging before you realize that we were better off with school choice being paid by the state instead of the school districts. And finally, on our bottom line, this is our simplified forecast in numbers rather than in the graph. You'll see it circled at the bottom where we start spinning into our carryover, $1 million in 2025 and $2 million in 2026. When we start spending into our cash carryover, we'll continue to review every staff resignation to see if we need to replace them or if we can move staff around to fill that resignation. After next year, I have no further resignations or reductions in staff in the forecast. So as we do see those savings, I'll have to update the forecast as we go. Are there any questions on this? I know I ran through it really fast.
So do we still have to pay for, I heard you talk about the, I'm forgetting the word. We used to have to pay when a kid went to a different school for their special education costs. We don't have to do that anymore. I was just telling somebody about that today. I was like, we have to pay for all of these things and we have to pay for that. And it's robbery of public schools. But if we don't, well, great.
That's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
We still have to pay for that.
So
right, so we do, but just not as much.
There's two different instances. So the way it used to be under school choice was the parents could apply for a voucher and they could take money from the school district. However, what's currently still in law is if the child is one of our resident students and we can't serve them in our district because their handicap is different from what we have the ability to serve, then we will send them out. And that is called a contracted special ed service. But parents aren't allowed to take that money from us anymore in a voucher. So it is kind of both ways.
So it is happening, but for different reasons.
And we control it. We control the child's IEP and their services that are provided.
So are there any questions? There's just a number of things I want to highlight with this 5-year forecast. Number one, just want to remind everybody that we're required by law to pass a forecast, a 5-year forecast, twice a year. So we really want to make sure that this does pass next week. So if there are any concerns, now's the time to kind of discuss them and iron them out. If you go to the cash flow estimates and resulting cash balance, so this is a really important slide because we do have a board policy that says that if that cash balance does dip below, I believe it's 90 days of available cash, then that automatically triggers the superintendent and the treasurer to come up with a plan on how to get us above that 90-day line. And so while right now it looks like we're doing fairly well, maintaining a healthy cash balance, and that's not free money, right? And so most of that is the result of a number of staff members being moved over into the ESSER fund, as our treasurer had mentioned. And so the ESSER fund just isn't really shown in this 5-year forecast.
That's right.
And so it's not hidden, but it's just not visible. if that makes any sense. And so, the cliff that Julie keeps talking about for 2024, those are all those people that are being paid out of that fund due to COVID that are going to come back to our general fund that, had we had to pay for them now, I mean, we would be having a completely different conversation about what to do with our staffing levels. But, that kind of moves the needle down to a couple years, but that's still going to happen. The other thing that I want to highlight on the revenue overview is in 2026 not that page, I'm sorry. The expenditure overview, if you go to that page.
We didn't get copies.
You didn't get copies?
No.
I'm looking at it on my computer.
Yeah, I'm just saying we can't.
Oh, no.
I thought you wanted me to flip to something. I'm like,
I apologize. I apologize. But if you go to the expenditure overview slide, to me, this is a scary slide. Because anytime that a business or an organization has over 75% of their expenditures tied up in just salaries and benefits, that is not a fiscally healthy situation. So it's hard to sustain that. Actually, it's impossible to sustain that. And so just so that everybody has just kind of an awareness of this, the difference between 75% and 80%, that's $1.5 million that we're looking at, right? And then if you go into the last slide of where that actually starts eating into, our cash balance in years 25 and 26, well, guess what? You take those 2 years and you average them out. Guess what that number is? It's $1.5 million. So, while right now, we're looking somewhat healthy, there is some work to be done on the health of the district. And, I appreciate all the work that our administrative team does to make sure that we stay in a good fiscal situation. So, but that's why we do this twice a year, is to look at these numbers and to sit down and just make sure that all of our eyes are really wide open as to the financial health of our district.
Yes. I like to say that for this year and the next 2 years, our budget is artificially healthy in the general fund because ESSER is helping us out so much with our expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a true health.
It's not a true health. So
Let us hang on for a couple more years.
Correct.
So does ESSER have to be spent by that specific date? Or would we be able to stretch those dollars out and maybe take a couple more staff and start incorporating them sooner than those last 3 years?
It is a 3-year grant. It must be spent in total.
In those 3 years,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's very restrictive too. There's only 14 things that we're allowed to spend it on. So it's been quite a challenge even getting it to work for the district. But we've done some really good things with it.
I've appreciated the creativity in budgeting. I feel like you could teach a master class on managing a household budget just alone. If you can handle this, you can handle anything. To be able to move those funds around in a way that's going to keep us solvent and give us the opportunity to be more responsible in those coming years, as we don't know what's going to happen with the state or our funding model.
Mm-hmm.
They could change it tomorrow, yay. But you've been able to follow every bouncing ball that's come at us, so thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we'll move on to item 5 in our agenda, and that's the Education Committee, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Board Member Ms. Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first item up, 5.01, are the student field trips. There's a list attached there in board docs. 3 classes for the 5th grade from Norwood View will be taking a trip down to the library on several different dates. The 5th grade trip to View will also be rewarded for their reading goals by taking a trip down to the park, and they will be walking down there and packing lunch. It'll be a really nice spring activity for them for rewarding all their work. Our other 5th grade class from View trip is the Adopt a class. They're going to be taking a trip over to Siemens. They've been a wonderful community partner. They'll be providing lunch and working on some of their STEM principal engineering programs. So they'll be walking down there and working with them, learning about STEM programming. Sharpsburg 5th grade is going to be going to Green Acres as a group, and they'll be working on animal and plant life, and just have, again, more fun outdoors for their science activities. Schwarzburg Primary is going to La Rosa's Pizza. They are going to be doing that for lunch for the first graders, so that'll be a really cool activity for them. And they're going to be learning about money and budgeting, consumer services, and actually applying those real life skills out in the community. And that is all of our field trips. Our second item, 5.02, is going to be an adoption of the instructional resources. Some of those were given to us earlier today. The science courses we have are listed all there, 1 through 11, the different materials and books and which edition are going to be discussed. 5.03, I'm so excited for our class. Graduating list is here, pending all materials get turned in. We have roughly 105 on the graduation list in a couple of weeks coming up. So I'm very excited to present them for next week to approve for graduation. And that concludes the education report.
Are there any questions about any of the items on the education committee? No? All right, we'll move on to item number 6 in our agenda. That's personnel. I'd like to turn the floor over to Superintendent Wayne.
Thank you, President Atwood. In 6.01, it's our non-renewal and resignation numbers. Number 1 is a non-renewal, and number 2, we are losing 3 of our staff members who will not be returning next year. So we wish Sarah Guy, Adam Reynolds, and Steve Schnee well, and we will definitely miss them. 6.02, employment. This is the reinstatement of our aides, so they know they have employment for the next school year. Because we did not renew them last month, they're all reinstated. Then, that was under number 1. Under number 2, this is an intervention specialist who we hired when she graduated. She has been working with us, and we do want her to stay and continue next year, because we are, if you noticed, last month we had 2 intervention specialists who did not return from a leave of absence. So she will help fill that gap. Number 3, orchestra summer camp. Allison Marshall is going to run it again this year. I believe last year was the first time she did that. So we're going, and it was very, very successful and popular among students and parents, so it will return. Number 4, these are some of aids for kindergarten camp. We do that every year in August to get students acclimated, so these are our aides who will assist us in running a great program. And number 5, I have no pupil activity contracts this meeting. I believe we have hired all of our people for spring sports already. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Ronan. Any questions about the personnel recommendations?
Do we know dates yet for the kindergarten camp so we can start advertising those for families?
It is in August, like about a week before the school starts, but the school will advertise and send that out to the parents.
I'm glad we're having orchestra camp again. My kid liked it, and it's great because if your kid doesn't do orchestra in 6th grade or 7th, and then they're like, oh no, that looks interesting, they can go to the camp and get caught up.
Oh, good.
And join orchestra.
Okay.
Maybe I can convince my kid.
And we will also
my
have
younger one.
a band camp also this summer.
All right, no other comments or questions? We'll move on to item 7 on our agenda. That's the policy committee. I'd like to turn the floor over to Vice President Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we have the second reading tonight of 18 policies. So we've kind of grouped these together. So 1 and 2 have to do with non-discrimination. 3 through 6, student conduct on district-managed transportation. 7 and 8 have to do with professional staff contracts and compensation plans. 9 through 12, educational options. 13 through 16, college credit plus. 17, health education, and 18 is blended learning.
Thank you, Vice President Cole. We've already had the first reading. Has anybody received any feedback or concerns from the public about any of these policy changes?
I have a purchasing procedure that I need to change. It's a very minor change. I'll probably email it out to you so you can read it, but I'd like to put it on Thursday's agenda to be approved. It's not policy, it's a procedure.
It's a
So
procedure, so
it's
we
the
don't need
more-
the 2 readings?
Yes, so it's the more minor one. Yeah,
Okay.
this doesn't require the 2 readings.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Kroll. We'll move on to item 8 in our agenda, that's Building and Grounds Committee, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Board Member Mrs. Bracken.
Thank you. We have an approval of the Moeller football schedule. They'll be at Shea, which I do believe last month we discussed they had a new contract. This reminded me of that. So they have August 26th, September 3rd, October 15th, October 21st in their playoff games. And then we also have FC Cincinnati is going to have a soccer camp at Shea, June 6th through June 10th.
It's fantastic. Any questions about any of the facility usage requests?
I was just talking to Chuck about how we can, like, give me your wish list. What do you want? I want to see us being used more, use Shea more. So to have FC partner with us is really cool because we already use it for a lot of soccer stuff. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
Good deal. We'll move on to item number 9 in our agenda, and that's the Finance Committee, and I'd like to turn the floor back over to our treasurer, Mrs. Camphouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. Financial reports, I will work on the CFO report and monthly financial reports for next week. Our board meeting tonight is a week early, and with the forecast and negotiations and just closing the month yesterday, I haven't had time to get those done, but I will for next week.
You mean you haven't done everything in 2 days?
I know. So, change order listings are attached for your review. Next week, I'll have some change orders for you to approve for Williams that are just slightly above the dollar threshold for board approval. There are things that we knew were coming, like the remodeling of the downstairs board office for our tech office, things like that. 9.02, independent contractors agreement. This is to bring in another social worker on a contracted basis, which is a good use of money. 9.03, appropriation resolution, and 412 certificate. This will be attached to next week's meeting also. 9.04, the SWOCA software agreement. SWOCA provides software services for our businesses and our business office and our student service offices. 9.05, Hamilton County ESC annual order for 22-23. We have already submitted our wishes for the order next year, but we don't have them back yet from them. When I do get them, I will attach them to the agenda for your approval. 9.06, the 5-year forecast and assumption. 9.07, resolution declaring transportation and practical. This is just to add 1 school for the current school year. 9.08, notice to proceed. This is the next step in our North Norwood parapet wall repair. 9.09, resolution declaring transportation and practical for next school year. And again, for next week, we'll have the full list of schools ready on the agenda. 9.10, New City, my mind just went blank. SNC Church in Sharpsburg block plan is to approve our portion of the block plan improvements that came to $29,056.74 and include site preparation, demolition, and asphalt work at Sharpsburg Primary. We talked about this about a year ago, I think, with all the churches and pastors came in.
This had the little walkways
Yes.
and the community space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. 9.11, Public School Works renewal to renew our software agreement to provide staff training on mandated issues and to provide help desk resources for several departments in the district. I think that is it. That's all for finance.
Are there any questions or concerns about any of the items on the finance agenda?
Did the block plan have a predicted start date? I don't see one on there.
They had talked about this summer, but then they quickly said, no, that won't work, so I'm assuming they will start on it next summer.
Okay.
They know that we cannot do work during the school year, so.
Right.
I know this is not related to this finance report, but since we're talking about that block and, start dates for improvements. So, I learned last week that Smith Road there in front of the school, that road is slated to be redone and repaved, not this summer, but starting next summer.
Not soon enough.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, so not this summer, but next summer. And the challenge is gonna be, because I don't think that they'll be able to get all that work done before the start of the school year, like at the end.
Hope they work with us.
So that, not the start of next school year, but the start of the following school year after that, that may be somewhat of a challenge.
I'm surprised that our safe routes didn't cover that section that just cuts in front of Creamy Whip, because it's like, it's one of the worst pocket streets, and it's just a block long. I'm surprised that didn't get covered.
Yeah, but I know people are always wondering, when are the streets gonna get redone? And then there's a schedule.
Yeah.
And, I have to hand it to our superintendent of public works, Mr. Clint Zimmerman, for, making sure that things are on the list and getting done. And, that's on the list and it's going to happen, so.
Good to know.
Any other items? No? Item number 10 on our agenda is adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.